How's everyone doing today? This is Chopping It Up Hardcore with Hal Capone, discussion number 73. Today, I'm speaking to my special guest today is Daryl from the epic, legendary band Snapcase. Just an amazing band, one of my favorite hardcore bands of all time. Just a juggernaut in the Victory stable. Daryl, I see I'm going to grab you right now. Daryl, how you doing?
Good, good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect. You hear me good?
Yep, sounds good.
Awesome, awesome. My apologies once again for kind of doing this makeshift Instagram, but we're gonna make it happen either way. So I got a little pinched on a anti-racist post on my regular page, but I'll be back on there sometime soon. So thank you once again, and I apologize. My fault.
No problem. See if I can do this with my glasses. I don't know. I'm at that age where I need the readers, but like they also have the protection, so it's like everything looks blue.
Yeah, yeah. I have the readers too, but I have the nerdy readers that go like this.
Oh wow, that's this extra level of nerd right there.
Yeah, yeah, magnetic nerd readers. So I want to thank you once again for coming on talking to me. Usually when I first do these talks, I ask, what music were you into before you found hardcore? What kind of, when you were a kid, drew you to music, and what were the bands that you were listening to back then?
So I guess it depends on how early you want to start, but first getting into music, driving around in the car with my father, he would just play AM radio. So, the AM gold kind of stuff, which was, probably like at the time it was the early to mid 70s. So probably a lot of like Paul McCartney and I remember like Glenn Campbell, Rhinestone Cowboy was like one of the first songs I remember like being interested in and asking, oh, what's this all about, So,
Yeah.
But it was stuff like that early on. Then through some cousins, I quickly got into metal. Buffalo was a really big Rush town, so Rush was like everywhere. You could hear it blasting out of car stereos, and all my cousins were into Rush. So, I think Rush, Ozzy, probably some lighter weight metal too. Like before that, like some just rock, like Billy Squire and stuff like that. It's like kind of neighborhood stuff. But then quickly started to find things like Iron Maiden, Metallica, and then that was kind of and then a little bit of rap. Like, so I remember being in school and a kid bringing a tape to school and he was playing us Run DMC and like, this is this new thing. You guys got to check this out. And
Yeah.
so I was probably in like 7th or 8th grade or something. I think 7th grade.
Yeah. Now, when Yo MTV Raps came onto MTV, were you a fan of that? Because that was kind of hooked me back then with Yo MTV Raps.
Oh, definitely. I was definitely a fan of Yo MTV Raps. Yeah, my brother and I would watch that all the time.
Speaking of hip hop in Buffalo, have you heard of the MC rapper West Side Gun and Conway the Machine from Buffalo? Because they kind of put Buffalo back on the map the past few years, and it's been a huge hip hop culture now back in Buffalo. Are you a fan of that, the Griselda Records stable?
Oh yeah, I am. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I definitely like it. My neighbor mentioned it to me a few years ago, and then my brother was like, you're going to like this because it sounds a little bit more old school, because he knows that, not to be like too much of like things don't sound like they used to kind of a person, but like a lot of modern hip hop just doesn't grab me. It doesn't,
Yeah.
It's not as soulful or as meaningful lyrically, and just the beats aren't there like
Yeah.
I remember them. So, but these new guys from Buffalo kind of have a little bit of that, Wu-Tang vibe a little bit, and some of that going on. So I like it a lot.
Yeah, yeah. That being said, I wore a little West Side Gun shirt just to represent Buffalo.
Nice. And those guys are cool because they are really repping Buffalo. They're not like, they're wearing that in the front, so that's cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had to ask because it's just been blowing up in the past, at least 4 or 5 years now, and I know always repping Buffalo. I had to ask about that. So my next question is like, what drew you to hardcore, and what were the bands that kind of grasped you to kind of want to go into that scene? Did you have like a specific favorite band that kind of did it for you to get you into that scene, or was it kind of just a bunch of kids hanging out and that was what was being, happening in your neighborhood?
No, I think first, well, it wasn't really, it didn't first hit me from my neighborhood so much. I wasn't into BMX bike riding and skateboarding, so I was starting to kind of become aware of it, but I hadn't really heard much of it yet. Freshman year of high school, I went to a private high school, and kid sitting behind me in homeroom, right off the bat, he and I had all these things in common, like skateboarding and BMX racing. We had actually raced against each other. And he was like, are you into punk? And I'm like, sure, I think that's cool, but I don't really know much about it. So he brought me a tape, which, had like Misfits, Dead Kennedys, and Sex Pistols, stuff like that on it. And I was like instantly hooked. I was like all about this. And then Buffalo had a really good underground radio show at Buffalo State College. The college radio station had a hardcore show every Thursday night. It was on like either at 10 at night or midnight, or maybe it went 4 hours, 10 to 2 a.m., something like that.
Yeah.
So I used to just like set my boom box up, stretch out the antenna. The reception was bad, so then I did the whole tinfoil to the, window screen thing.
Yeah.
And I would hit record on my cassette, and I'd get the longest tape, it was probably like, 120-minute tape or something like that.
Yeah.
Hit record, and then when it would end, the popping sound of it hitting the end of the side would wake me up. I'd flip it over. And then the whole next day, I just bring my Walkman to school and listen to it on my headphones and just like absorb all of this music. And the guys doing the radio show in Buffalo at the time were playing just everything was just so great. It was a little bit of like crossover metal, DRI and stuff like that, but
yeah,
also like all the New York hardcore stuff, everything from like, all the, it was like Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, Sick of It All, that first wave,
yeah.
from New York. And then of course, like some of the Boston stuff, Slapshot, and then the DC stuff, they were playing with like Dag Nasty. And so I remember the first albums that I really got super into of hardcore, besides like all these mixtapes from the hardcore show, which was everything, Youth of Today, it's just endless, Minor Threat. But I remember my friend and I hopping on a bus from the suburb we lived in to go into Buffalo to Home of the Hits record store, which was like the indie record store in town. And we bought 2 records that day, and it was Dag Nasty, Can I Say, and Uniform Choice, Screaming for Change.
Nice.
And it was one of those things, like we just listened to those 2 albums like on repeat for like the next year.
Yeah.
So those were huge for me.
Yeah, that's I have a very similar story. In Boston, they had at Emerson College, they had a radio show at night, kind of the same time as you were speaking of, and it was called Nasty Habits. And like us being the age that we are, you were talking about the same memories that I have, putting in a tape late at night. I'd fall asleep, same thing, and then the next day I would listen to everything, and I would, think about all these bands that I've been hearing, and then I try to go out and get the records and stuff like that. So I was living like almost on the Massachusetts border between New Hampshire and Massachusetts, so it was very hard to get the reception, like you were saying. So I was, like I had a coat hanger with some tin foil and like all kinds of stuff just to get a little, glimpse of what they were playing. But it definitely helped. Kids nowadays have it easy. They just go on the internet and pull up a band and check it out for 10 seconds and be like, oh, I don't like it. But they don't know the the struggle that we had to try to find new albums and new bands and stuff like that. So
yeah. And what I actually loved about those days too was, so like I was still really into punk, and like some of the punk bands that crossed over into hardcore, like for example SNFU. So like I loved them. Like their early stuff was just like, I don't know. I didn't really care if it was punk or hardcore. And then
Yeah.
my friends and I also listened to a lot of metal. So because like Cannibal Corpse was from Buffalo, so we were really into like exploring the death metal scene and just kind of stuff like that. So, we would go to like see, I'm trying to think, like Carcass and Death and Obituary.
Yeah.
Like, we would go to these shows just to kind of like check it out. And like a lot of the hardcore and punk and metal kids were all kind of like part of the same underground scene
Yeah.
at that time. And that was, to me, that was cool. Like Alex, the bass player from Cannibal Corpse, he came to like every like hardcore show, all the straight edge shows. Like he was there, like
Yeah.
really cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Back then was a lot of, wasn't Malevolent Creation from Buffalo too?
They were, yeah.
They were after Snapcase though, weren't they? Or were they right around the same time?
No, probably around the same time, and maybe even, I don't know, maybe early '90s. I'm trying to remember. I'm terrible with timelines.
Yeah. I can remember like as far back as I was like hearing about Buffalo with Snapcase and Malevolent Creation and Despair and what was and Zero Tolerance, of course. That those were like the oldest bands that I could really think of in the scene. Is that kind of how the scene started with those main bands like Zero Tolerance and you guys and Despair?
So Zero Tolerance, they were like they had a couple of bands prior to Zero Tolerance, which had most of the same members. One was called New Balance, and also the one before that was called Third Man In. Yeah. So like I had seen those guys open shows here throughout the years, and Zero Tolerance. I mean, anyone from the Buffalo hardcore scene will tell you that was the band. Like that was the influential band. That was the band we all wanted to emulate because they kind of combined what Buffalo was about, but also like it was like a brand of like metal and hardcore. Yeah. That was Buffalo. And I remember, so we started out as kind of like, your typical like basement punk hardcore band, like trying to learn how to play some chords and, a couple simple cover songs, things like that. And then Zero Tolerance with like, when they took it up a notch to more metal sound, double bass, a lot of, crunching. Yeah. That was what we wanted to do. So we kicked our drummer out at the time, who was like a really great drummer. Yeah. Jason Corcunis. He went on to be in like a whole bunch of awesome bands across the country, like Delta 72, and I think he's in the Hot Snakes now.
Oh, no kidding. Nice.
So it was a huge mistake to kick him out, but we really wanted double bass, and he wasn't into that. So that's how like obsessed we were with like this sound that Zero Tolerance was putting out there. So
yeah, and I know you played bass starting out in Solid State. Was Solid State your first band that you were in, or did you have like a band before Solid State?
No, Solid State was the first band. My friend that I skateboarded with in my neighborhood, he was the singer. My cousin Scott was learning how to play guitar, so like light bulbs just instantly went off in my head. He was younger than me, but he was playing like these cheesy like 80s rock covers and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, you got to get into punk, So I remember getting him into the Descendants and Social Distortion, Mommy's Little Monster at first, and then getting him more into Minor Threat and things like that, Uniform Choice, Youth of Today, stuff like that. And then he instantly got into it, and he became the guitar player. And we had rotating drummers. I mean, the drummers thing kind of kept changing. Yeah. But we had the River Rock Cafe, which is also a staple of the Buffalo hardcore scene. That was our venue. Yeah. And that's where all the great shows were. Slapshot put on so many good shows there. Sick of It All, Youth of Today, Bold. I mean, everything. Gorilla Biscuits. I mean, these shows, Uniform Choice, everything came through there. Yeah. It was a small venue, 300 capacity roughly. And like people like you mentioned Despair, so like Scott Vogel, myself, our old singer Chris, Garrett Klon, who ended up singing for Texas Is the Reason. Yeah. all the other guys in Snapcase for the most part. We were all there in the mosh pit, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
together. You know, we're all, even the guys from Chokehold were there because they would come down from Canada to the Buffalo shows. So, you know, that's kind of what came out of that scene and out of that club.
And having all those bands play in Buffalo, did you not need have the need to go down to New York City to go see those bands play down there? You know, because back then it was, you know, Cro-Mag, Agnostic Front, Murphy's Law, you know, all that era, Sick of It All, like stuff like that. Did you ever go down a lot down to New York City to see shows, or did they were all coming up to Buffalo at that time?
Never. We didn't have to go anywhere. It all came here. There were more shows than I could go to. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it was great.
I,
Verbal Assault, and I mean, like, yeah, it's endless. Everything came through.
it's funny that there was so many shows back, you know, when we were younger. I always talk about it here too, because there would be a show I mean, in a week span, there would be 3 hardcore shows. You know what I mean? Nowadays, it's like one show every, you know, month, maybe. It could be maybe, you know. And like you said, I don't want to say, okay, you know, you should have been there, or it was a different scene back then. You don't know how it was, or whatever. But um, literally, the shows were nonstop. There was always a Sunday matinee with 10 bands that were like killer. There wasn't any like filler bands thrown in there. And it was a very special time. And I heard you talking about it on another interview where you said that you didn't really like think it was special. It was just something you kind of were doing, and didn't think it was like a magical moment at that time. You kind of just not took it for granted, but like, you know, stuff like that. And I think the same way. I was in the Boston scene since I was, you know, a little kid, and it was kind of just like everyday thing. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, wow, like things were really special back then. Do you kind of have that same type of thought process?
Oh, sure. Looking back at it now, it was really special. I mean, we saw the same people week after week, or a couple times a month at least, to go to see these shows. And, like, part of going to the show. So I remember being so excited to go to a show because, number one, you could pick up some fanzines.
Mm.
You'd see the opening bands that maybe you didn't know as much about. Um, you know, and then also was like to kind of like get the flyer for whatever was coming next. So that was always really exciting to see what other shows were happening. And, sometimes it was just like that next show was next week, and you
Yeah.
made plans with your friends right then and there. So it was great.
Yeah, I would always look for people with different shirts on too, and then I would try to find like the band that I was like, oh, that shirt looks cool. That must be a good band. The struggle was real back then, just trying to find new music and stuff like that. Speaking back then, I know you were playing bass. Did you always want to play bass, or I know you kind of transitioned into singing when Snapcase, started going. Um, did you always want to start playing bass, and what kind of led you to singing from bass?
I didn't always want to play bass. Bass was kind of like that's the instrument you pick up when you already have a guitar player and you already have someone that's going to be the singer. Obviously, drums. I mean, I'm amazed when I hear stories of people just picking up drums, but I'm not the kind
Yeah,
of person that could just pick up any instrument and just start playing. Bass was something I could pick up, and the guitar players could show me sort of what to do, and I would work hard enough to learn how to do it and play it right. So the transition to vocals also was not something I really wanted. I was getting comfortable being the bass player.
mm.
I was just really into being in the band and taking the band to the next step, whatever that might be at the time.
Yeah.
And when we needed a new singer, the guys in the band were like, you should just be the singer. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And let's think about this. And
Yeah.
then it just sort of kind of happened. And
So
we were playing shows like really soon after. I mean,
yeah,
I think we played with Fugazi that year. I mean,
really.
crazy
Wow.
stuff. Yeah.
So they were kind of just like, all right, you be the singer. Were you apprehensive and kind of nervous getting on, grabbing the microphone for the first couple times? Was
Oh
it?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I one thing to become like the singer screamer, and then also to like be a front person, right? So to get up there and have to sort of command the stage or whatever like that, none of that really comes natural to me. So, you know, that was, but I knew what I loved about hardcore, and I knew what I wanted the band to be all about. So in that regard, it was not too difficult, but to say it was what I always wanted to do or knew I would do that, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
You know, it was a total by default kind of thing, and
Yeah.
learn as you go.
Yeah. I talk about, I sang for a couple of like small hardcore bands in New Hampshire, and my first couple of times doing live stuff, I always had my back turned, and I always talk about like performing with your back turned for the first couple of shows, and then you get used to it, obviously, and you know, things start flowing more fluidly and stuff like that. Was that something you did, or did you just go for it right off the bat, even with your anxiety being high, kind of like the first time doing it?
No, I think, you know, if anything, we were too much into jumping around and looking cool on stage, where to the point where you're like forgetting what you're doing musically. So, you know, it was more the opposite, you know, like just getting people's faces up front and
Yeah.
stage dives and jumping as high as you can and running back and forth. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of, you know, what am I supposed to be singing or what are we playing came secondary.
Yeah. Now, what was your first release with you singing on it? Was it Looking Glass Self, or did you do something before that?
It was Looking Glass Self.
That was the very first thing you did.
Yeah, we had written most of those songs with Chris on vocals, and we were prepared to go to the studio with Chris on vocals. So yeah, that was another thing, you know, like we ended up at Don Fury's studio, and I had only been the vocalist for not very long at that point.
Yeah. Now, was that you know, kind of like a touchy thing for you, kind of just because you didn't know how to approach it, just kind of being thrown into that situation?
Well, what do you mean by touchy?
Touchy just as like, all right, you guys, like you said, you had the songs already written, and the other singer already was going to go and record, and then all of a sudden you're the singer and you're recording. Was it kind of, were you like, uh-oh, like
I don't think we had any time to think about it. It was just like,
it was just like,
we're on Victory Records. Holy shit, this is exciting.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to do our first album. It's going to be with Don Fury. Like, we have to have it together. It wasn't really any time to think about feelings about it. You know what I mean? It was just like,
Yeah.
Let's get this done. Let's do this. And, you know, I did realize pretty quickly at Don Fury's that, you know, we weren't as sharp and as tight as a band as we should be musically to be at that level.
That being said, though, Looking Glass Self kind of blew up back then. I mean, that era of Victory, the explosion of all the bands that were happening at that time with Earth Crisis and Strife and you guys and Dead Guy and Bloodlet, it was kind of an explosion of a new scene back then. And how did Victory actually come to you guys and say, hey, we want you in the fold, we want you in the stable? How did that happen?
Well, first of all, they didn't just come to us. You know, in those days, you know, you would record a demo. I would go through Maximum Rock and Roll and look for like all the small hardcore labels that had ads in there and had their address.
Yeah.
And then we would put together a little press package together with our demo tape and, you know, maybe, I don't even know if we had a photo, but just, you know, just something with a logo and an explanation. And I remember sending that out to a lot of different labels. You know, I wish I remembered which ones. I'm sure Revelation was one of them. You know, there was a bunch of Midwest labels. Probably New Age at the time, I think. I'm not sure where they were at that point. But anyway, hardly anyone responded. So then we did a second wave with a new demo, and you know, Tony from Victory did respond and say, hey, you know, would you guys be able to make it out to Chicago to play a show and we could check you out? And so
Yeah.
that was sort of the next step. So we went out there and we played in Chicago, and I think he put us on a show, and I think Farside played also, and then some Chicago bands, and
Yeah.
all of Tony's friends were like super into our demo, so they all went off when we played, and he was like, yeah, let's do something. So
Yeah, that must have been exciting back then. Definitely,
and he didn't have Strife or Earth Crisis yet. Integrity was, big on the label. I think
yeah,
he had Iceburn,
Iceburn. Yeah, that's right.
Billingsgate, stuff like that.
Now at that time, I don't. Integrity didn't even have a full length out though. Didn't they have like 7-inch at that time when you guys got?
Gosh, I'm so bad with timelines. I'm not sure. I know I saw Dustin pop up on the chat there a minute ago. He would know because he's way better at that kind of stuff than I
am. So that being said, Looking Glass Self, what was the first tour, the real tour that you guys did, and who did you play with in that tour?
So we were always playing regionally, which meant like from Buffalo, we would play Erie, Pennsylvania. We would play Rochester. Mm-hmm. And then the next step from there would be Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And in that circle, we would play with bands that were also kind of regional, but a little bigger than us. And one of those bands was Outface from Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So I think like we played with them a bunch of times, like before we really made it too far out of the region.
Yeah.
And then we started to expand further and further. And we were playing a show in, actually, I think out your way, in Burlington, Vermont. You said you were from New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So,
was that Club 242 that you played?
Yeah. And I think it was with 108 and Lifetime. Really cool bill. And the Lifetime guys were talking to us and said, you guys should get in touch with Dustin's responding about Integrity. Full length Integrity was on Overkill from Washington, 91. So that definitely is before, Looking Glass Self is 94, I think. So anyway, Lifetime guys said, call Margie. She books our tours and our band. So we called Margie, and actually what she ended up doing was putting us on a tour with Lifetime. And that was our first full American tour. It was us with Lifetime out to California and back. And then shortly after, we went to Europe with Sick of It All, which was just kind of like blew our minds because we loved Sick of It All. We thought, no way in a million years would we be in contact with those guys, or would they know who we were, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we also never thought about playing. I mean, we just started playing out of the region and getting to California. All of a sudden, we're getting asked to go to Europe, which to us was like, do bands do that? Like it was like, oh my God, like it wasn't the kind of thing where every band did that back then. So that tour was initially supposed to be like 9 weeks long together on a bus with Sick of It All. It got cut down to 7 weeks, but still.
Yeah.
That was on Looking Glass Self, and to this date, that was sort of our, boot camp, so to speak. Like we learned how to do everything the right way.
Yeah.
Touring with Sick of It All for those 7 weeks. Because they were playing festivals on that tour to like 60, 70,000 people. Mm. And then they would play a show like in the south of France to like 50 people.
Yeah.
And their performance was the same as it was to the huge crowd as it was to 50 people. And that was huge for us to learn how to bring it every night, you know?
Yeah.
So
Sick of It All was a very special band to me as well. I got to see him in the No Sweat. What is it? What's the first album?
Blood, Sweat, No Tears.
Yeah, Blood, Sweat, No Tears. And I remember buying the long sleeve shirt that said it on it, and it had like the live picture on the back and stuff like that. And I saw it at the Channel in Boston. It's not a club anymore, but I think it was Gorilla Biscuits might have played that show with them, and Burn possibly I think was on that show too. And every time that I saw Sick of It All was always a time for me. Like I said, I'm old. I mean I look like Santa, so I've been around for a while. And those New York bands were very, very special to me. And it must have been amazing, like you said, going on tour, especially in Europe with Sick of It All. How did the fans react to you guys when you went on that tour, kind of being the newbie on the tour?
Yeah, so that tour was amazing too, because as I mentioned earlier, we were into so many different types of underground music.
Mm.
And on that tour, I think we played with, I know we met the guys in Entombed, which was like, oh my God, you know, we love those guys. And
Yeah.
I think we played some shows with Napalm Death and Obituary, but then we were also like crossing paths with like Pennywise and NoFX and stuff like that. So again, being with Sick of It All, these like New York hardcore like heroes to us, and the way they communicated to all these different scenes within the underground. And again, it was not as different as it became, because it was the underground back then. But the crowds for us, you know, were kind of like, some nights they knew our record and they were into it, you know, like in Germany for sure, and in Scandinavia for sure. Other places not that much, but it didn't really matter. It was a blast, you know, and crowds back then would go off to like every band, you know what I mean? It wasn't like,
Yeah, it's
you know.
definitely true. So after Looking Glass Self, Steps came out, which was very special to me too. I think I wore my Steps hoodie, the one that had the little feet on, like on the right here in the hoodie. I think I wore that almost every other day in high school, honestly. That was a great EP, and I know you said that it kind of was recorded slower than you wanted it to be. Can you talk about that? And because I think that EP is amazing and still holds up nowadays really, really well. What did you want more from that EP? Because I think it's like classic EP, definitely.
Yeah, so Looking Glass Self, we were like kind of learning what we wanted to try and do, and little by little, piece by piece. Steps, Scott, my cousin, he was the primary songwriter, and he was listening to a lot more DC type stuff at the time. And Verbal Assault was probably our favorite band.
Yeah.
You know, across the whole band. And so that was like Scott's big influence was Verbal Assault, and he loved the groove.
Yeah.
In hardcore that they brought. So I just remember touring a lot and Looking Glass Self, and Scott was playing his guitar, writing every day on tour, and he'd have these riffs, and those were the riffs for the Steps EP. And to me, Steps is like the first time Snapcase really sounds like Snapcase. Like, this is like, we start to really kind of put together what will become our sound and what makes us different and we stand apart. But those songs live had way more energy, were a little bit heavier, were a little bit faster paced. In the studio, you know, trying to be perfectionist, setting a click track.
Yeah.
It was too stiff and a little too slow. But yeah, it's the kind of thing I'd always love to record those songs and play them the way they were meant to be played.
Yeah.
So what's important about that is when we went to record Progression Through Unlearning, we found Steve Evetts, again, through Lifetime, and he had also recorded the Dead Guy album at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So we were just like, yeah, we need to go work with this guy. And Steve, first thing he said was, what do you want out of this recording? And we said, well, we need to sound like we do live.
Yeah.
We're not happy with our previous recording. We need to push the energy, push the tempos, push everything. And he's like, I got it. Okay. And
yeah.
He did. That was like, and you know, the Sick of It All tour was like our boot camp for live performance.
Yeah.
This was our boot camp for like being a studio band. Like working with Steve, he was a perfectionist, but also like, you know, you're not screaming hard enough. I don't feel it. I don't feel the emotion. It's got to be harder.
Yeah.
You know, and whether it was Tim's drumming or my screaming or whatever it was, you know, he took it to another level. And I don't know, to this day, to me, Progression Through Unlearning that's our best work. So
yeah, I mean, to me too, it's definitely my favorite. Speaking of, I never got rid of my CD. I've had this for a very, very long time. It's like still holding up. I keep it very, you know, I don't mess around with it. There's no scratches on it or anything, and it's been time since I've had it, and I don't think I'll ever get rid of it. So yeah, that album was very, very special, and the recording is amazing. It's just clean, like heavy, everything that you want in a hardcore album. That album has it for sure. Were you guys, you know, very pleased with the outcome after it came out?
Um, I think for sure, but like again, it was like we had to hit the road. I think we were right back on tour, and at that time we were probably touring more than we ever toured. I remember at one point being on tour 10 months of the year, you know, so um, I don't know. Again, not much time to think about it, you know, just we were happy, you know, and but again, I don't think we knew how different it sounded, you know. People would bring up things like, you know, Tim snare drum and stuff like that, you know. Um, you know, of course, there's things you wish you would have done differently or a little bit better, but um, it had the energy that we were looking for. In fact, we might have taken it too far because I don't think we played some of those songs that fast live even.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You know, it would be amazing if you guys toured again and just did the whole album from top to bottom. Have you ever thought about doing something like that? I know Integrity was doing it just a little while ago, and I don't know if Dead Guy did Fixation on a Coworker like just at this past like festival, but I thought I saw something under the flyer that was like they're playing the whole album. Have you ever thought about doing something like that where
we've talked about it. So Progression Through and Learning will be 25 years this year now, 22. So that already was mentioned, yeah.
yeah.
So whether or not we're going to do it, I don't know. But I definitely want to do something special for the vinyl. I don't think you can find it right now. So, you know, I want to do something special for the 25th year of that vinyl.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you guys did merch too, that would sell like crazy too. Because like I said, my Snapcase hoodie, I don't have it anymore because it just fell apart. But I wore that thing like crazy. So I know if you guys put out some merch, it would sell like crazy too. I wanted to speak about the straight edge and the veganism that you guys did, but not portraying it like down your throat. It was more you guys were straight edge and vegan, but it wasn't pushed into people's faces, which isn't a bad thing too, because I love Earth Crisis. Like Earth Crisis was huge to me, and I got caught up in the wave when I was young of that straight edge movement. You know what I mean? It was like Earth Crisis, Mouthpiece, Turning Point, like all those bands were very, very special to me. Could you talk about, were you always like that? How did you find straight edge? Did you kind of dabble in drinking or whatever when you were younger and you were like, this isn't for me? Or what? How did you find that peace of mind into straight edge and veganism?
So I think, you know, that was all part of, to me, being punk, you know, like when I was in high school, the thing that you did if you weren't punk was you partied and you were like listening to Pink Floyd, The Wall, and smoked weed with your friends, and
Yeah.
that wasn't for me, you know. And here I was getting into hardcore and just underground music in general, and like, what was more counterculture than saying I'm not going to smoke and drink? I mean, because that's what everyone else did. So to me, it was sort of like really punk to be straight edge, and but it also was like a really good thing for me because I don't know, I just really related and gravitated to all the early straight edge bands, you know, whether it was, you know, first hearing about Minor Threat, but then like, of course, like Youth of Today and all the Rev bands, like Slapshot, like I loved all of that stuff. It was huge for me. And I think all the guys in our band. And when the 90s hit and we're on tour with Earth Crisis and Strife, I remember those guys would all X up and they would pass their marker around to X up.
Yeah.
And they would give us a hard time because, like, and you know, we didn't know because of your albums, but like, you guys are all straight edge. Why aren't you Xing up? You guys should X up. I remember the Strife guys, like, almost like some peer pressure, you know? You put the X's on like we are. And we're just like, no, our band is more about our band and our message beyond that, you know? Our message is to kind of like know yourself and to be more introspective and to to gravitate towards things because it's for you as an individual, not because you want to be part of some bigger clique or something bigger than you are, you know. So, you know, in some ways, yeah, maybe we could have sold more T-shirts if we put X's on them, you know, but in other ways, you know, that wasn't what we were about. And we, even though we loved straight edge as much as all those other bands did. And I think it really hit me, and the most meaningful thing for me was back then people were still writing handwritten letters. So,
Yeah.
so that's how old I am, right? So in some emails, but I probably still have these handwritten letters somewhere from people talking about how they overcame addictions because Snapcase made them think positively about themselves as a unique person, as an individual.
Yeah.
Not so much telling them what to do, but kind of like encouraging, empowering them to think differently, to want to be better, to want to do things, and rather than make them feel bad for who they were, right? So in some ways, having a positive message without being preachy about straight edge was more effective in helping more people to be straight edge.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's often overlooked, and people don't really talk about that because the most straight edge is the most X's and the most in your face, right? But when you talk about veganism, I owe those tours with Earth Crisis to like really, for me, to learn about veganism.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the California Takeover shows that we played a couple of years ago, when I was growing up, the band that kind of like blew me away with their message on stage or what they were saying, what they were challenging you to think about was Youth of Today.
Yeah.
In the 90s, to me, that band was Earth Crisis. Those guys took so much shit from so many people. They stuck by their message. They were really true to their message. And I don't know, it was an honor to be on tour with those guys and kind of like be part of that, see that whole thing come about. What those guys were doing was really special.
Yeah, I agree totally. And the positivity that Snapcase, I kind of think that's what set you guys apart from the norm of the straight edge stuff. Is it wasn't angry like straight edge, you know what I mean? It wasn't really, like I said, you weren't pushing it in people's faces. It was almost like a positive message and stuff like that. And I think that kind of took you in a different direction. It wasn't the same old, you know, cookie cutter band talking about straight edge. And I agree with Earth Crisis with you too, because when I heard All Out War and Firestorm EP, it started having me think about, you know, what I was doing in life, because in the beginning I was listening to metal too and doing stuff like that and experimenting with, you know, alcohol and drugs and stuff like that. And then I started listening to Youth of Today at first, and then Slapshot, obviously, because they were from around my neck of the woods. And then when Earth Crisis hit, it was kind of different just because of the animal liberation. I know Youth of Today was kind of touching on that, but they took it to another level. And it really got me thinking. And I changed my ways for years and years and years and years. And I never looked back. And it was, I don't know if it was like, I hate to say a phase, because a lot of kids kind of just got into that straight edge phase because it was the cool thing to do in the scene. But to me, it really had my mind thinking back then when I was trying to find myself. And, you know, I might have strayed away after the scene kind of died down. But I'd like to say now that I've been like 2 years sober, I haven't had a drop of alcohol. Talking about straight edge, my daughter made me this thing last night with the straight edge.
Nice.
My girl daughter made me so I always have to talk about straight edge and stuff like that because, you know, I might have dabbled in some dumb things when I was a kid, but I've always tried to keep that good message and mindset. So with you, was it ever a hard thing to not be straight edge? Were you ever peer pressured into like, you know, oh, maybe, you know, drink, like as your age now, or have you always been straight edge from day one?
No, I haven't always been straight edge, and you know, as an adult, one thing I do is I drink wine from time to time. But I don't know. To me, the straight edge roots, they're still hugely important to me now as an adult who isn't completely straight edge. I don't know. Just taking care of myself, my body, my mind. That's kind of like ultimately what it was about, and that's still important.
Yeah.
So, and
Now,
that foundation was set.
now, were you did you play sports when you were younger in high school? Did you do the sports thing like football and hockey and basketball and stuff like that?
Baseball
Baseball.
and cross country stuff like that. I neighborhood football and basketball all the time. I love sports,
Yeah.
and I still love sports now. And that maybe that was why I also gravitated to straight edge, because that was kind of like where it was accepted to be into sports and into punk rock at the same time. But I remember skateboarding for me became more important than playing baseball, and that was where I had a falling out with my father. I was into punk metal and hardcore and skateboarding,
Yeah.
and not focusing on baseball and
Yeah.
the American apple pie stuff as much. So
Yeah.
that was a challenge as a teenager, and that's what led to a lot of like the early lyrics that I wrote. As far as like, and the whole idea of finding myself and looking glass self and steps and progression through learning. That's all where that comes from is, growing up in a family that I love and appreciate and respect, but at the same time knew that I was confined and I only knew what I knew because of the growing up in a really like conservative traditional family, growing up in the suburbs and, finding punk rock, hardcore metal and going on tour, meeting all different kinds of people, thinking about how different people live, just becoming more compassionate in general. That's where the whole progression through a learning thing came to play, because, like I couldn't really understand and appreciate and learn things unless I started to like deconstruct what I already known and learned throughout my life. Right.
Yeah.
So that's as hard as learning new things, is to kind of like give up on what you already, how you were brought up. Right. So
Yeah. And in turn, you're a dad as well as me, and it kind of gives you those values too now, where you're thinking, okay, like I'm gonna do this and that now as a dad. You know what I mean? There might be
oh yeah,
parents
for
you
sure.
might have done that you didn't agree with, and now it's a learning process being a dad yourself and being like, because personally I was brought up not in a good situation at all, and now I try to give my daughters everything that I didn't have and all the opportunities that I didn't have. So that it's funny how things go like that. Even if you're brought up very well, you're still learning when you have kids yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very true when you become a parent that some of those things you said you would never do or never say, start coming out, of course, and when I get agitated, I start to sound like my father did when I was younger. But, ultimately what's important is, to feel loved as a kid and to feel like there's that one piece, like I knew I was loved, but I also knew I wasn't being listened to. I was being talked to.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a huge difference these days.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, Now I want to talk about when Snapcase kind of blew up a little bit, and the Warp Tour happened, and you guys headlined for Deftones, right? I mean, not headlined. You opened up for the Deftones on a tour as well. Just the popularity of Snapcase started to explode a little bit. You guys headlined Hellfest in '99. Did you guys feel pressure that you were playing bigger shows and you had to do more to be more popular at that time, and not like when you guys first started out you were just having like raw fun at the time? Did you feel a pressure because of the popularity that was happening at that time after?
I wouldn't say we felt pressure because of the popularity. I really liked playing smaller stages, smaller venues. Um, the challenge was being a hardcore band that finally learned how to be good at playing hardcore shows. and then going on to like the big stage.
Yeah.
And I remember, jumping on that Deftones tour, and their crew hated us. Like we were just a bunch of amateur kids. You know what I mean? Like,
Really?
oh yeah, at first. And then we smoothed everything over. I mean, we thought we were pro from being on those Sick of It All tours and those European tours and
Yeah.
playing some metal shows. But no, when we got on tour with Deftones, it was a much different level. And to kind of like, I don't know, conserve your energy the way you needed to be on that large of a stage. And I just felt like the whole band was so far apart from each other. I didn't really enjoy that. I liked having the guitar player standing right next to me and the kick drum, kind of like, feeling that, right behind me. So when you're on a big stage, it's a colder feeling. It's just, to me, not hardcore. It's not punk to me, Then being so much higher in elevation than the crowd or the barricade, all of that was really difficult for us, I think, initially. And, it's a completely different thing, and also being the support band for a band that's as big as Deftones or some of the bands we were going out on tour supporting.
Yeah.
Their fans don't know your stuff typically, and they're not there for you. Deftones was pretty decent because Quicksand was also on the bill, and some of those shows had like this huge hardcore, scene came out to the show, and it was great. Other places it was more like a radio show where it was like we weren't a radio band and they were. So
Yeah. So wow, that's crazy. When you guys broke up, was that 2005 that you guys broke up? Right around that time?
I don't know. It was like we were on and off so many times throughout those years. I can't really say what year anything happened, but I think ultimately what was going on was different people were starting to like step out of the band. Like Tim was doing his PhD stuff and not touring, so we had Ben playing drums. Ben was an integral member of the band.
Yeah.
But then there became a tour where John didn't play, and John, to me, was like he was sort of as much the face of the band through all of these years as I was. He was always like right up front, screaming the lyrics and getting in people's faces, and
Yeah.
he had brought this energy to stage. So then he didn't do a tour, and it just started to feel like almost like it was becoming a different band and like not really Snapcase that was recording the albums.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was different. And, I was reaching a point in my life where, I'm not making this kind of money. I'm stepping into a next level adulthood here.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long can I keep doing this? I love doing it. But so that was kind of, where these changes were happening. I don't remember exactly like when, Ben was in the band and then Tim came back and we did End Transmission, which after Progression Through Unlearning, to me, like those are my favorite songs. And some of those songs that I like just as much, but it's not, we weren't in the thick of the 90s like we were in Progression. I think that's the difference. But
still a solid album though, and Progression. I mean, that album is really good. The End Transmission, like I think that's really, really good album. And when you guys broke up, what got you back in 2010? Were you just like talking amongst friends and you guys wanted to do some reunion shows and stuff like that, and you just missed each other? Is that kind of what the thought process was, to get back into it?
To be honest, what brought us back together the first time around was Norm Brannon. Norm, who was in Texas is the Reason and did Antimatter. He reached out and said, hey guys, I'm trying to do a benefit show for Jay from Jawbox for his son. And, I've got some interest from some bands and I would love to have you guys. So it was just like, I don't know, the timing must have been right or it was a special enough reason to do it. And so, we put it together and we went and played, I think, 2 nights in New York with 108. And Yeah, it was a blast. And I think that kind of like reignited us, playing together.
Yeah. Now, was there a fever at that gap for you to play music? Did you have like a fever? Were you missing that at all, or were you kind of just doing your own thing in life and kind of progressing as a an adult?
No, I don't think I did because I think I was doing too many other things, so I always put
Yeah.
my mind to something. And I was pretty detached from the hardcore scene during those years. And I know that now looking back because there were some bands that were really big around 2005 to 2010 that I had no idea who they were.
Yeah.
And that wasn't like me. I always knew what was going on with the scene. And
Yeah.
there was a huge gap there. And, I was pretty detached. I wasn't paying attention to the underground scene or the hardcore scene those early to mid 2000s at all. So
Yeah. So how did return of the California takeover happen? How did Andrew from Strife kind of get that going, or how did that actually come about? And I mean, the vinyl looks amazing too. That came out, the colored vinyl and stuff like that. It just looks so great, and it was such a great idea when I heard about it. And the East Coast dates, they didn't happen because of COVID, and now it's happening in
in
20.
May.
Yeah, in May. Can you just talk about that and how special that was to get back on stage with, especially Strife and Earth Crisis and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly how it came together, but I was excited that it was coming together. And, to get back with those bands who, the three of our bands were on Victory at that, time and place, like that mid 90s and touring together and kind of like growing up together musically. To redo that show, I mean, the first California takeover, I don't remember, thinking of it as much of an event
Yeah,
because we had played together so many times,
yeah,
and I don't even think I was thinking about the live album when we were playing the show. I
yeah,
definitely wasn't. So then to look at that album and it's like documented an event, it's kind of strange to me because that wasn't the way I thought of it when it happened back, the original one.
yeah,
So to get together and play these shows as this kind of like California takeover 2021 or 2020 or whatever it was, it was really cool and really special because, here we know what our bands kind of like meant to the 90s hardcore scene and, to get together and go play these shows. And, I always feel, so lucky to be able to go and do this. So to go to California and play these shows and, you just don't know what to expect. We were still the type of band where like, oh man, is there gonna be like 3 people there, or is everyone just gonna like be psyched to sing along to Strife and Earth Crisis and like they don't like us, like we're not cool or something. And
yeah,
then I think we played last in San Francisco, and that was the first of the 2 shows. And it kind of like to me just felt the best we felt on stage in a long, long time.
yeah,
And that's a really good feeling,
yeah,
and that's how you know what you're doing is right. The show just happened organically, from the minute we hit the first note to the end, and the crowd was great. The camaraderie with the other bands was great.
mm,
And then to go and play LA the next day, it was super fun.
yeah.
And I'm glad that it was recorded, and I'm glad that the record came out again. So
The great the great thing is too, the younger generation gets to be exposed to that a lot of people always want older bands to play so they can experience what it was back then, but it's awesome because people as old as us and then younger kids get to experience such a great thing too. I feel like the East Coast dates will be really, really great for you guys. Are you looking forward to those dates coming up?
oh yeah, for sure, because it's gonna be in Buffalo first and then Philly, and so we always love playing home in Buffalo. But then throughout all of our years of touring, I would say the best shows for us consistently were typically in Philadelphia.
Yeah, really.
We had a lot of really fun shows there. A lot of great support from the crowd. We just loved playing there. So
Yeah,
to go back to Philadelphia and play, will be cool. We've played enough over the last 5 or 6 years to kind of know what songs we should be playing at this point, because we played